of the symbolism and the mythology that they'll be using at that time, and I'll bet you anything it's going to be relative to stargates and wormholes.
I think so. There seems to be a tradition throughout the opening ceremony specifically to talk about all kinds of weird stuff. I'm thinking back to the LA Olympics where they had some kind of UFO landing type thing after, I think it was the closing ceremony. You've had other things pertinent to DNA and the birth of a new child during the I think it was the Torino Winter Olympics in Italy. Things like that. Is it because we have massive amounts of people tuning into this? So I would think that they would want to send a message, if you will, and it seems to be a multi-contextual, if you will, William. So it's very interesting watching this stuff, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympic parks themselves are just phenomenal exposés of the latest architecture and concepts, and again, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they come up with in London, because I'm sure it's going to be absolutely spectacular and will undoubtedly have a message for us to decode.
You bet. And so why don't we get into a little bit here in terms of the secret of Sion? And you can, obviously, you've been on a path, William. You've been following on from one end point to a new beginning all the time. You've been moving forward in your work, and this is your latest one, obviously. And how does it connect with your other work? Is it moving on from a point where you left off last time, or how did you approach the latest one here, William?
In a way, the Secret of Sion is a compilation, but it also breaks some really new territory. This is a one of a kind book that is a departure from anything that you see out there on this subject. The key concept behind it is that there is a tribe, a race of Stargate traveling, time traveling beings that ultimately, when you follow their trail, when you follow the literary trail as left in the Egyptian texts, as found in the Gnostic texts, you follow them all the way to the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And you've discovered that there's this belief in this literary tradition that there are what we refer to as ascended human beings, the next level of human beings who are in light body form, who have left Earth, travel via Stargate or wormhole to the center of the galaxy, and come and go from that place. And one of the prerequisites for this travel is they put on what they referred to in ancient Iran as the beaming garment. The beaming garment is a transmittable garment of light. It was worn by Elijah when he ascended into the heavens in a whirlwind. It was worn by the Sumerian god Enki, the creator god of the Anunnaki. It was worn by Jesus in his transfiguration. It is passed from person to person to person and from generation to generation to generation, and its ultimate use is to transform us into light beings preparatory to going through these gateways or portals that ultimately lead to the center of the galaxy. And the reason it's so important that we look at this now is because, again, according to Maya 2012 prophecy especially, the center of our Milky Way galaxy is rising. It's rising in our awareness. We're gaining understanding of the center of the galaxy. We know more about it now than perhaps at any time in history. And what I'm saying is that there is an ancient literary tradition that discusses the center of the galaxy and tells us about advanced human beings that dwell there.
Really interesting. And there's so much to this, of course. I remember, William, back when I discovered your work for me anyway, in the beginning, you had a book out called Cloak of the Illuminati. Very interesting. And it seems to pick up on this thread here that you mentioned about the beaming garment. I think in that point as well, you talked about that from the point of view of the coat of many colors that yeah. Joseph was wearing. This is the same idea, correct?
Yes, it is. The term that I chose then was the cloak or garment of light, or the cloak of the Illuminati, because when I looked up the word Illuminati in the Webster's dictionary, I found that it was defined as a newly baptized Christian initiate. That's one of its earliest meanings. And of course, you find references to the illumined ones, the shining ones, throughout the ancient world. And what I started picking up on was this thread of this idea that, well, how did these guys become illumined ones or shining ones? And what I would inevitably find is that they were almost always possessors of a garment, a cloak or garment of light that gave them extraordinary human powers and ultimately enabled them to open and travel through these gateways.
That's right. And do you think that this is something that there's I always had two takes on the Illuminati, if you will. We have an elite dark force that are using this terminology. They're using this veneer there, if you will, actually blinding us with the light in that sense. And then you have a real one, a true one, but what actually has to do with true enlightened beings. So there is a kind of a war or a tug going on here between these two forces. But do you think that there has been research and is research on Stargate type technology of actually trying to access maybe this power, maybe actually through the use of some other technology that we don't know about yet, to tap into this or even transport themselves there or bring in something? What do you think, William?
Well, I'm somewhat skeptical about claims that the U.S. government or the dark or black ops people, black hats, possess Stargate technology and we're already traveling to Mars and doing all this sort of thing. And the reason why I'm skeptical is because when you look into the ancient record anyway, and mind you, things can change over a couple of thousand years.
That's right.
But when you look into the ancient record and you look into the stories of Jesus, you look into the stories of the Anunnaki, you look into the stories of any of the ancient figures that are associated with this cloak or garment of light and the ability to open and traverse these gateways, you find that the only way in the ancient world you could access these gates was to become a being of pure light and pure love. And I just don't see these black ops people as being in the business of creating beings of pure light and pure love.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the they that I draw. I'm totally open to being to having my mind changed on this. I'm totally open to any of these people that make claims that they use this Stargate technology. Show it to me. I'm right there with you. I would love to believe that we have that capability, that we have developed our technology to the point where we can actually do this. But until then, I think movies like Stargate, movies like Contact, Carl Sagan was a huge disinformation agent in regards to Stargate technology. He was the one who literally invented it as a literary device. He and Kip Thorne at Caltech envisioned this device that could open stargates or wormholes. And you remember the storyline, you get this machine, the blueprint for a machine beamed to us from Lyra in the movie, the star system Lyra. What that does to me is it sets up a literary gargoyle. It sets up this scenario where individuals are disempowered because only these special black ops people, can have access to this technology, when every single ancient spiritual tradition, the Tibetan, the Egyptian, the early Christian, the Iranian, every single one of them talks about humans being able to traverse these gateways. None of them refer to any kind of device or machine, say for the Egyptians, which we can get into and to talk about the distinction, but none of them talk about an actual device that is used in order to do this. What they all do talk about is that, hey, Henrik, William, if you get your act together, if you work on and develop your spiritual potential, you can spin your body into a vortex of pure energy, dissolve it into pure light, and open a stargate or wormhole with your body and travel to other star systems. That is the clear potential that they hold. And this is why I get a little bit, just angry isn't quite the right word, but just sort of skeptical, suspicious when you get people talking about Stargate technology, because again, it takes it off of your personal power and what you can do with your life and onto this idea that, hey, these guys are ripping us off. The elite have this. They've taken it from us. Let's go get it back. Well, that's bogus in my view, completely bogus, and is a total literary gargoyle. And it tells me that the person is really probably a disinformation agent for the dark side of the Illuminati.
Well, that's a good point. And I was thinking about something as well, because as I've heard you speak before, William, on both your presentations and on other programs and so forth, you were talking about this third alternative that we shouldn't be stuck in left or right wing, but you're looking for a transcendent option, if you will. But it's also it's understandable. It's a difficult time right now, because if we view this as the game of Monopoly, if you will, then currently they own our house. They've burned down our hotels, and the streets we used to own have been taken away from us now by force of the New World Order militarized police, if you will. And not that all of this is about material stuff, but these material comforts, if you will, that we might have experienced for a while, they've ensured us to be able to focus on our spiritual life. But it seems like all this has been robbed from us. And so how do you see that we move on from here in terms of the situation that we're in right now? Because it's a node point, and even you have this sub theme on your site, William, that it's time. It's happening. It's right now. But it's a chaotic time right now as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And I recently heard Alex Jones say that the war for human liberty against total dehumanization is on now. And I agree with him. We are facing the greatest disaster in human history. We are being dehumanized. You got all these people with their phone roaches in their ears, and you've got this tremendous fear. And as you're describing, suddenly the Constitution in America has been shredded. You've got police forces on the streets all over the planet. But nobody was messed with more than the ancient Gnostics. And they were emphatic that if you want to achieve true liberty, true power, true capacity, strength, authority, you've got to tap into what they called a hidden power that raised us from dead beings, which is what we are when we allow these forces of fear to impinge on our or infringe on our consciousness, and become living beings. And this is when they talk specifically about, look, you have got to clothe yourself in what they called the perfect light, which is equatable to this cloak of light, the garment of light, the beaming garment. Because if you can do that, these powers, who are both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, spiritual as well as flesh and blood beings, they cannot see you if you are clothed in this light. And that is why I'm encouraging people to, hey, this is the time right now, today, for you to begin working on releasing yourself from this fear. Because if you're even thinking about it, you are that fear. And it's time to unplug from that and develop yourself as a being of light and love to the greatest possible extent that you can. Because if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? If you don't need motivation to do it now, what motivation will you need? And I mean, I'm not trying to sound preachy or anything to people, but it's like, look, I don't care what Rockefeller is doing what Rothschild right now. That does not concern me, because that does not change my life one iota.
Yeah.
It does nothing for me. But what I can do is release myself and work on my own self as a spiritual being, and that will allow me to shed more light in my life and shed more light in the life of those around me as well. And that's what I'm encouraging people to do, and that's the personal choice that I'm making right now.
So at the current moment, when things are as they are, the challenge to do these things is the greatest, but also potentially the impact, if we manage them to release during a time like this, that might mean in one way or another success of this mission, if you will. But what if we break down that a little bit more, and maybe you can describe a little bit more what you're talking about, what you mean that this will be individually, obviously, different for everybody, but what would you see the processes of us going through to begin to release some of these things and let go of some of the material realms and begin to focus on our spiritual essence instead, William?
Well, let's look at it this way. We've all got, if we're lucky, 24 hours each day. And we have a choice in how we're going to spend that time. And what I encourage people to do is just to start to look at yourself as a whole being. Feed yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, as if you were trying to achieve a state of wholeness and even holiness. I mean, so much of our time is spent on, for many people that I talk with anyway, they're focused on the conspiracy. They're trying to stay up with the latest crazy information that's out there. Well, that's great, because you do need some of that. You need to know what's going on in the environment. But at the same time, we can all improve our diet. We can all improve our thoughts. We can all be kinder. We can all be gentler. We can all be more patient. We can all be working towards connecting with our higher self. We can be working on just being more generous with ourselves as well as with others in our life. And what that does, it starts to set up this amazing